Welcome the anointed ones. Never try to inflate your ego with someone else's life. You might just pop your own balloon. There's a strange kind of irony in this world. People who have completely wrecked their own lives somehow think they can use yours as a confidence booster. It's like a person who totaled their car trying to give driving lessons. They're out here swerving through other people's destinies just to feel like they're in control again. Psychologists say that people with fragile egos often seek ego fuel. They latch onto someone who shines brighter, hoping proximity will make them feel important again. And when that someone happens to be you, a person with self-awareness, quiet strength, and unshakable authenticity, the collision is inevitable. You became their mirror, and instead of facing their reflection, they tried to scratch your glass. They mistook your peace for permission, your composure for naivety. They thought they could climb out of their mess by standing on your shoulders, not realizing you weren't their ladder, you were their lesson. But oh, how the script flipped. Life humbled them so smoothly, it didn't even make a sound. They wanted to use your story as an ego boost, but ended up becoming a cautionary tale inside it. Now they're forced to watch the very person they underestimated walk in the grace they thought they could manipulate. So let's talk about it, because this isn't just about revenge or karma. It's about divine irony, spiritual justice, and how life always exposes those who build their self-worth on borrowed glory. Number one, they mistook your self-control for weakness. They thought your calmness meant you were clueless. They took your silence as a green light to play games, to test limits, to see how far they could push before you'd react. But what they never realized is that your silence was never submission. It was data collection. While they were busy performing, you were observing. You watched the patterns, the inconsistencies, the arrogance they mistook for confidence. You saw how their ego inflated every time you didn't clap back, how they mistook your restraint for fear. In truth, you were 10 steps ahead, watching them build their own downfall brick by brick. People like that have a strange kind of blindness. They can spot pride in everyone but themselves. They think manipulation makes them clever, and that deception proves dominance. But the universe always has a quiet way of restoring order. When your heart is pure and your intentions are clean, you don't need to retaliate. The energy you operate from does the heavy lifting for you. They thought they were getting away with disrespect, not realizing that the same calm they mocked was your shield and their trap. When someone tries to play you, their ego demands immediate gratification. They need to feel smarter, stronger, or more in control. But when you don't give them the chaos they're fishing for, it starves them. That's when their downfall begins, because they end up exposing themselves trying to provoke you. They show everyone who they really are, and you don't have to lift a finger. Life humbles people like that in the most poetic ways. The same stage they use to mock you becomes the platform that exposes them. You never had to prove who you were. You just had to stay still long enough for their own actions to speak louder than your words ever could. That's why, when the tables turned, it wasn't revenge. It was revelation. The truth didn't come crashing in with fireworks. It unfolded quietly, like a curtain being pulled back. And when everyone finally saw the difference between your composure and their cruelty, there was no debate left to have. They called your calmness weakness, but in the end, it became their greatest teacher. They learned the hard way that silence doesn't mean powerless. It means watchful. And when someone underestimates a watchful soul, they don't just lose control of the game, they lose the illusion that they ever had control at all. Number two, Their ego needed your energy to feel alive. They were running on empty long before they met you. Their confidence wasn't confidence, it was caffeine. Temporary, shaky, and completely dependent on outside validation. You became their source of energy, their emotional charger. Every compliment you gave, every bit of attention you shared, every ounce of kindness you extended became the only thing keeping their ego alive. They weren't interested in connection. They were feeding. And for a while, you didn't even notice it, because you were operating from sincerity, not suspicion. They started to feel powerful around you, not because they had grown, but because they were tapping into your strength. It gave them a false sense of superiority. They mistook your support for worship, your encouragement for submission. The truth is, they didn't admire you, they envied the peace you carried. It wasn't about love or friendship. It was about survival. Their self-worth was so fragile that they needed your light to feel visible. Without someone like you reflecting something beautiful back at them, they had nothing to measure themselves against. Then came the shift, the moment you pulled your energy back. It wasn't loud or dramatic. You just stopped giving them what they'd been silently draining from you, and that's when the cracks started to show. Suddenly their charm faded, their confidence deflated, and their mask started slipping. Without your energy to lean on, they had to face themselves, and they hated what they saw. They went from feeling superior to completely lost, and that's when the humility hit. People like that never realize how much of their power depends on the ones they exploit. You were never their competition, you were their mirror. The only reason they felt strong was because your spirit reflected what they could never embody: stability, authenticity, and peace. Once you stepped away, their borrowed confidence expired. They didn't lose you. They lost access to the version of themselves they only felt real when you were around. And that's the real humbling moment. When someone realizes they were never as powerful as they pretended to be, that they were just temporarily illuminated by someone else's glow. You didn't take anything from them. You just stopped supplying what they never earned. The ego they tried to inflate through you deflated right in front of them, and all that was left was the emptiness they'd been running from all along. Number 3, they tried to measure themselves against a standard they could never reach. They couldn't handle your growth because it exposed everything they refused to face in themselves. Instead of seeing you as inspiration, they saw you as a mirror, and the reflection made them uncomfortable. They wanted to outshine you, but they didn't want to do the inner work that produces real light. So they tried to compete with you using shortcuts, illusions, and manipulation. They wanted the respect you earned without enduring the pain you survived. It wasn't admiration. They were trying to beat you in a race you never signed up for. They compared every move you made to their own life, secretly measuring their worth through your progress. When you healed, they called it luck. When you succeeded, they minimized it. They couldn't celebrate you because your existence exposed their stagnation. Deep down, they knew they had the same opportunities to grow, but they chose ego over evolution. Competing with you gave them something to focus on besides their own lack of direction. But envy is a self-inflicted wound. It only eats the one who carries it. What they never realized is that you weren't moving to impress anyone. You were just doing what you had to do to survive, to evolve, to honor your calling. While they were watching your every step, you were too busy building yourself from the inside out. That's what made the difference. You healed in private, while they performed in public. And when the results started to show, they panicked. They thought if they could outshine you, they'd feel fulfilled. But you can't compete with authenticity when your foundation is insecurity. Their need to beat you became their downfall. They lost themselves trying to outdo someone who was never playing the same game. They exhausted their energy trying to prove something you never questioned. Eventually, life humbled them by showing the obvious. There was never a competition, only a contrast between someone who evolved and someone who avoided growth. The same person they tried to outshine ended up becoming the proof that genuine self-work always wins. In the end, they weren't your rival. They were your revelation. They exposed how far you've come and how deeply they're stuck. You didn't defeat them, you just kept growing, and growth itself became the greatest humiliation they could ever experience. Number 4, they were addicted to being above someone. Their entire sense of worth depended on feeling superior to someone else. They didn't know how to exist without comparison. To them, life was a constant scoreboard. Someone always had to be beneath them for them to feel tall. They couldn't thrive in mutual respect. They needed dominance to breathe. So when they came across you, humble, grounded, and self-assured, they thought they'd found their next ego project. They assumed you'd play along with their little hierarchy game, that you'd shrink to make them feel significant. But the energy you carried didn't respond to manipulation. It exposed it. They were addicted to control. It wasn't about you personally. It was about maintaining the illusion that they were above someone. Every condescending remark, every subtle jab, every attempt to one-up you was just their insecurity trying to find relief. They wanted to feel like the main character in someone else's story because they'd lost direction in their own. But when you didn't play the submissive role, when you stood tall without fighting back, it rattled them. You didn't challenge them with anger, you disarmed them with peace. And peace to an egocentric person feels like punishment. The truth is, people who need to feel above others are terrified of equality. They can't stand being around someone who's secure, because your confidence cancels their illusion of power. Your presence reminded them that real strength doesn't need hierarchy. It stands firm without an audience. You didn't have to prove anything, and that alone was the greatest threat to their identity. While they were performing superiority, you were embodying authenticity, and that's something ego can never compete with. Eventually, the act fell apart. Their arrogance turned into desperation because their validation source, you, stopped reacting. They couldn't drain power from someone who refused to bow. And when the dust settled, they had to face a painful truth. The person they tried to belittle was actually spiritually above them the whole time. You were never beneath them. They were just too blinded by pride to recognize your divine ranking. That's the kind of humbling that stings the most. Not because they lost control over you, but because they realized they never had any to begin with. You can't degrade what heaven has already exalted, and once life made that clear, their illusion of superiority crumbled under the weight of its own insecurity. Number 5, they wanted to feed off your reputation because they lost theirs. They had already burned too many bridges, lied to too many people, and destroyed too many opportunities. Their reputation was hanging by a thread, and instead of rebuilding it through accountability, they tried to attach themselves to someone who still had a name that carried weight: you. They thought that by being seen next to you, talking about you, or even trying to imitate you, they could reclaim a sense of respect they no longer deserved. It wasn't admiration. It was desperation. They needed your credibility like oxygen, because without it, they were suffocating in the stench of their own dishonesty. At first, it might have looked harmless. Maybe they flattered you, praised you, or pretended to support you. But behind it was an agenda: to absorb your light and redirect attention away from their decay. They believed that association could disguise corruption, that if they stood close enough to someone genuine, people would forget how fake they were. But the thing about real light is that it doesn't just illuminate beauty, it exposes rot. The closer they got, the more obvious their motives became. Truth has a vibration, and when lies try to exist in its presence, they start to tremble. You didn't have to call them out or prove anything. Life handled it for you. Slowly, people began to notice the contrast. While your name opened doors, theirs closed them. While your presence brought peace, theirs carried chaos. It became impossible for anyone to confuse the two energies. And that's when they started to fall apart publicly. The same mouth that tried to speak over you began tripping on its own words. Their credibility couldn't survive next to someone who walks in integrity, because deceit can't coexist with light. It either transforms or disintegrates. In the end, they didn't just fail to steal your reputation. They destroyed what was left of their own. You were never their rival. You were their mirror. Standing next to you forced them to confront how far they had fallen. They tried to feed off your name, but your energy acted like a spiritual disinfectant. It burned through every lie, every mask, every pretense. And when the truth finally settled, their shadow looked darker than ever. Not because you exposed them, but because standing next to the real thing made their imitation impossible to ignore. Number 6, they confused access for ownership. They thought because they were close to you, they had you figured out. They believed that access meant authority, that being part of your circle gave them a say in your life, your choices, even your identity. Somewhere along the line, they forgot that knowing of you isn't the same as knowing you. They confused being around your energy with owning a piece of it. And when people like that get too comfortable, they start to rewrite your story in their favor, twisting truths and adding their own edits, as if your life was their property to narrate. They felt entitled to your peace, your time, your attention. They wanted to control the version of you the world saw because deep down, they wanted to keep you small enough to make themselves feel secure. The moment you started outgrowing their narrative, they panicked. They couldn't handle the evolution because it reminded them they were only ever a chapter, not the author. That's when the entitlement turned sour. They began to criticize what they once celebrated and question what they once praised. Their ego couldn't accept that access is a privilege, not a right. When God anoints someone, He doesn't give out ownership papers. He gives warnings. Don't misuse proximity. Don't mistake presence for power. Because chosen ones are not to be possessed. They are to be respected. Every person who tries to claim ownership over a soul that doesn't belong to them eventually faces the same fate: removal. God quietly shuts the door, blocks the energy, cuts the tie, not out of cruelty, but out of protection, for you and for them. They never expected the connection to end because they thought you wouldn't leave. But chosen ones don't need to argue when God says, enough. One day the access just ends. No announcement, no explanation, just silence. And that silence becomes their lesson. They realize too late that being close to you was never about control. It was about stewardship. They were meant to learn from your light, not try to cage it. And when they misused that access, heaven revoked their privilege permanently. In the end, they learned that proximity doesn't equal possession. You were never theirs to define, manipulate, or confine. You were an experience, temporary, divine, and transformative. And once they mishandled that gift, the gates closed, and all they were left with was the memory of what they thought they owned, but never truly understood. Number 7. They tried to weaponize your kindness against you. They saw how soft your heart was and decided to test it. They mistook compassion for compliance, thinking that because you always gave the benefit of the doubt, they could keep pushing boundaries without consequence. They weren't interested in building trust. They were testing limits. Every time you forgave them, they read it as permission. Every act of kindness made them feel more in control. What they didn't realize was that empathy doesn't mean blindness. It means you were giving them the space to reveal who they truly were. And reveal they did. They learned your triggers, your patterns, your willingness to see the good in people. Then they tried to use all of that as leverage. They twisted your understanding nature into emotional currency, thinking they could cash in on your conscience. They thought, they'll never walk away. They care too much. But that's where they made the biggest mistake, assuming that kindness means a person won't draw the line. When you have a good heart, you don't stop loving easily. But once you do, it's permanent. You don't just shut the door, you change the locks. Your grace wasn't weakness. It was a divine test. They failed spectacularly. God watched how they handled someone who meant no harm, someone who wanted peace, someone who only gave love. And instead of honoring that, they weaponized it. They took your patience for granted until it became their undoing, because every time they thought they were winning by manipulating your softness, they were only tightening the spiritual rope they'd been handed. Grace is merciful, but it's also precise. It allows enough room for repentance or for self-destruction. They chose the latter. When their world started collapsing, it wasn't punishment. It was cause and effect. Life always balances itself. The same kindness they once mocked became the mirror of their cruelty. You didn't need revenge. Your absence was enough. The energy they once abused turned on them, and now they're the ones seeking mercy in places they never valued. In the end, they learned the hard truth. Kindness isn't a flaw, it's a filter. It separates the genuine from the opportunistic. They thought they could use your compassion as a weapon, but all they did was prove that not everyone deserves access to a heart like yours. Number 8. They got addicted to the power of being needed. They were never in love with you. They were in love with how you made them feel about themselves. They built their identity around being the one you needed, the one who came through, the one who saved the day. It wasn't about care, it was about control. Their sense of power came from your dependence, and the moment you started standing on your own, their ego went into withdrawal. They weren't offering help out of love. They were doing it to feel useful, to feel irreplaceable. But the problem with false heroes is that they secretly hope the damsel never gets free. They created small fires, just so they could rush in with water. They caused confusion so they could be the voice of reason. They stirred emotions just to play the role of comforter. It was a loop. Chaos, rescue, repeat. They fed off the gratitude, the attention, the validation that came every time you leaned on them. They wanted to be your solution because it made them forget about their own brokenness. You became their emotional project, their proof that they mattered. But healing ruins that illusion. The moment you started evolving, learning to self-soothe, finding peace without their presence, building stability from within, they panicked. They began to criticize you for changing, calling you distant or ungrateful, not because you did anything wrong, but because you no longer needed them to hold your world together. Their ego couldn't handle being replaced by your independence. They mistook your growth for rejection, but in reality, you were just outgrowing the dynamic that once empowered their dysfunction. What they never understood is that real love celebrates your strength. It doesn't compete with it. A healthy person doesn't want to be needed. They want to be valued. But theirs was a counterfeit version of love, rooted in superiority. When that false power source disappeared, so did their sense of identity. Without your dependence, they had to face their own emptiness, the part of them that only felt worthy when someone else was broken. In the end, your healing humbled them in ways words never could. You didn't have to cut them off. Your growth did it for you. The ego that once thrived on being needed was left gasping for relevance, and the silence of your peace became the loudest reminder that their control was never love. It was fear dressed as importance. Number 9. They mistook your absence for irrelevance. When you finally pulled away, they mistook it for defeat. They thought you disappeared because you had nothing left to offer. They assumed your silence meant surrender, not understanding that you were in a sacred process, becoming stronger in ways the world couldn't see. They celebrated too early, convinced they'd won, that removing you from the picture meant erasing your influence. But chosen ones don't vanish, they evolve. Your absence wasn't the end of your story. It was the incubation of your next chapter. What they didn't realize is that stillness doesn't mean stagnation. When you stepped back, you weren't hiding, you were being refined. Growth doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it happens in quiet rooms, behind closed doors, where no applause exists. You were being seasoned, deepened, and prepared for a level they wouldn't recognize, even if they saw it. While they were gossiping, you were grounding. While they were mocking, you were mastering. And by the time your reemergence began, they couldn't comprehend how someone they wrote off could return so transformed. Your absence became a mirror to their own insecurity. The same people who celebrated your silence started to notice the void you left. The atmosphere shifted. Conversations felt emptier, energy less magnetic. That's when regret started whispering, because they realized too late that your presence wasn't just convenient, it was catalytic. You didn't take energy from spaces, you gave it. And when you withdrew, the light went with you. The truth is, chosen ones don't fade, they ferment. Like fine wine, time only intensifies their potency. Your withdrawal wasn't a disappearance, it was a distillation. Every moment you spent away was a moment of becoming more precise, more powerful, more unshakable. You turned your isolation into elevation, and now the very people who dismissed you can't stop watching your glow up from afar. Now, your name carries a different kind of weight, not from popularity, but from presence. You didn't need to announce your return. Your energy did it for you. And that's what humbles them most. You proved that relevance doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being become. You didn't fade out, you refined yourself. Your absence wasn't a loss. It was the consecration that made your comeback undeniable. Number 10. Their plan was to discredit you before you became unreachable. They saw what was coming long before you did. They felt the shift in your energy, the quiet confidence that said you were about to step into something bigger. It scared them, not because you were doing anything wrong, but because your growth meant they couldn't control the narrative anymore. So before your voice could reach too many ears, before your name could gain too much weight, they tried to plant doubt. They wanted to stain your reputation so that when your light finally broke through, people would second-guess what they saw. It wasn't about truth. It was about containment. They launched their campaign with whispers, half-truths, and exaggerated stories. They wanted to rewrite your character into something easier to dismiss. It gave them a temporary sense of power, watching others question you while you stayed silent. They believed that if they could destroy your credibility early enough, your influence would never get off the ground. But they didn't factor in one thing: divine timing. You were in a season of protection, not punishment. God allowed the slander to circulate, not to break you, but to build a public record of lies that heaven would later use as proof of your innocence. What they called discrediting was actually exposure of them, not you. Because when the truth surfaced, it didn't just clear your name, it revealed their motives. People started connecting the dots. The only ones speaking badly about you were the same ones threatened by your integrity. Their attempts to tarnish you became your testimony. The gossip they spread became free advertising for your story. Without realizing it, they made you known to audiences who might never have noticed you otherwise. They built the stage for your rise with the same energy they meant to destroy you. When the reversal hit, it was poetic. Every lie they told started unraveling at the seams, and the same mouths that mocked you had to watch you flourish untouched. They thought they were assassinating your character, but they were just announcing your arrival. That's what happens when divine purpose is involved. It turns attacks into endorsements. You didn't have to defend yourself because truth doesn't need defense. It needs time. And when the time came, every word they spoke against you became evidence of how unstoppable you really were. Number 11. They tried to mimic your essence without paying the price you paid. They studied you like a blueprint, thinking they could copy their way into your level. They mimicked your words, your mannerisms, your rhythm, every surface detail that looked like power, but missed the one thing that made it real: the process. They wanted the crown without enduring the crucifixion. They wanted to walk in your light without carrying the fire that forged it. And no matter how perfect their imitation appeared, something always felt off. Because essence isn't a performance. It's a vibration born from pain, prayer, and perseverance. They didn't understand that your glow wasn't cosmetic, it was chemical. It came from transformation, not imitation. You earned your peace through heartbreak, your wisdom through humiliation, your strength through surrender. They saw the outcome and assumed it was effortless. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the betrayals, the private wars that built your authority. They wanted your results, but not your refining. That's why, no matter how closely they tried to replicate your flow, it never resonated. You can't fake a frequency that was shaped in the furnace. What they were chasing wasn't even fame, it was validation. They wanted to be seen as you because being themselves felt too small. But every time they tried to copy your depth, they exposed their shallowness. People can sense authenticity. It has a pulse. There's a weight to realness that imitation can't carry. You speak and people feel it, not because you're loud, but because it's lived truth. They can quote you, dress like you, talk like you, even posture like you, but they'll never carry the same spiritual gravity. Anointing isn't in presentation, it's in permission. And heaven doesn't sign off on fraud. In the end, the gap between imitation and embodiment became too wide to hide. The more they tried to be you, the more invisible they became. Because God doesn't reward mimicry, He multiplies authenticity. You paid the price in tears, in trials, in transformation. They wanted the treasure without touching the trench. But essence doesn't come cheap. It's earned through endurance, not copied through observation. And when the dust settled, the difference was undeniable. You were the original blueprint, and they were just another imitation unable to survive what you survived to become who you are. Number 12. Their humble pie was served cold by the universe. When the tables turned, it wasn't loud. It was poetic. The universe didn't need to humiliate them publicly. It simply allowed them to face themselves without the fantasy. They had spent so long looking down on you that they built their ego on the illusion of your struggle. But when your setback turned out to be your metamorphosis, and your silence became your strategy, reality hit them like a delayed slap. The same mouth that once said you'd never make it now trembles to even speak your name. They thought they were above you because they mistook your patience for paralysis. They mocked your rebuilding phase, thinking your fall was final. But what they didn't realize was that chosen ones don't collapse. They cocoon. And when you re-emerged, you didn't just rise. You redefined the entire order they once used to measure themselves against. Their pride couldn't handle the recalibration. They wanted to be the hero in a story where you were meant to stay small, but you grew beyond the plot they tried to trap you in. Now, the universe is serving them the very dish they once fed you, cold, hard, and seasoned with self-awareness. The job they bragged about while belittling you, gone. The social circles they used to gossip about you in, shrinking. The admiration they once demanded from others, replaced with quiet pity. It's not karma out of vengeance, it's alignment out of necessity. The balance had to restore itself. They needed to learn that humiliation is the tuition for arrogance. The bitterest part for them isn't even losing you, it's realizing they never truly had the upper hand. They were sustained by the illusion that they were doing better, not by actual progress. When your growth exposed their stagnation, it became unbearable. And now, every success of yours echoes like a reminder of what they forfeited through mockery and pride. Their humble pie isn't punishment, it's revelation. It's the moment the universe removes the filters and forces them to see the truth. You weren't beneath them, you were beyond them. What they called weakness was simply divine construction. They laughed while you were building. Now they're crying while you're living proof that transformation doesn't need applause, it just needs time. Number 13. Their karma was watching you become everything they pretended to be. Their karma didn't come in chaos, it came in clarity. They're forced to watch the truth unfold in real time. Everything they tried to fake, you became effortlessly. They built their identity on borrowed traits, trying to appear wise, confident, or favored, while you quietly embodied the very qualities they only performed. They craved admiration, but never earned it. You didn't chase validation. You became undeniable. And now every victory of yours is a mirror, showing them what honesty produces when deception runs out of fuel. They spent years pretending to be the good one, the strong one, the chosen one, crafting false narratives to appear enlightened while secretly competing with you. They exaggerated their growth, mimicked your insight, and tried to downplay your light just to keep their illusion intact. But divine order has a way of flipping scripts without announcement. The same mouth that mocked your struggles now struggles to explain your glow-up. The same people who once pitied you now praise you, and they can't handle the reversal. Because when you live truthfully, life promotes you in ways lies never can. They can't stand to see you thriving, not because they hate success, but because yours exposes theirs as fiction. You became what they claimed to be, stable, authentic, peaceful, and favored. Your character aged well. Theirs expired under scrutiny. They can't talk about you without revealing their envy, can't look at your progress without remembering the masks they wore. That's karma at its finest. No drama, no spectacle, just exposure through evolution. The irony is that they taught you more than they intended. Their manipulation trained your discernment. Their deceit sharpened your intuition. Their false humility showed you what real grace looks like. So while they were busy pretending, you were busy becoming. You earned every ounce of what they faked. And now the contrast speaks louder than confrontation ever could. Their punishment isn't losing you, it's witnessing the proof that your destiny was never up for debate. You didn't just survive what they did, you outgrew the entire level they tried to keep you on. Every milestone you reach humbles their memory of control. Because now, the very life they tried to imitate has become the reality they can only watch from afar, choking on the truth they once tried to bury. Number 14. They tried to play God in your life, and God took it personally. They made the fatal mistake of believing they could outmaneuver destiny. They wanted to dictate your direction, control your narrative, and assign you an identity that served their ego. They spoke against you, plotted behind you, and tried to twist the perception of who you were to others, all while forgetting one crucial fact. They were tampering with a life protected by divine authorship. They thought you were an open script, something they could edit to their liking. But God never outsourced his authority. The moment they tried to play God in your life, they signed themselves up for divine correction. They wanted power over your path because your freedom exposed their lack of control. It wasn't about you being wrong. It was about them being threatened by your independence. They wanted to own your outcome so they could feel superior again. But the irony is, every manipulation they launched became divine construction material. Each lie they told only positioned you for truth to be seen louder. Each closed door they forced shut only redirected you towards something unbreakable. What they built to bury you became the stage for your unveiling. God doesn't take lightly to anyone trying to hijack his blueprint. The same way a parent won't let a stranger discipline their child, heaven won't let imposters dictate the fate of someone chosen. That's why every plot they initiated eventually turned on itself. The meetings they held in secret started dissolving from within. The alliances built to isolate you began collapsing under guilt, confusion, and exposure. God let them think they were winning long enough to prove that their power was an illusion, and then he flipped the script in a way only divinity could. They tried to silence your purpose with gossip, yet now their words echo with regret. They tried to block your opportunities, yet now your name opens doors without effort. They tried to shrink your influence, yet now their downfall testifies to your divine covering. That's what happens when people confuse authority with authorship. They can make edits, but they can't change the ending. So yes, they tried to play God in your story, but the real God took it personally. And instead of punishing you, he promoted you. He didn't just vindicate you. He used their rebellion as the raw material for your revelation. What was meant to humiliate you became heaven's way of saying, "No one rewrites what I have written." Everything that happened to you wasn't random, it was orchestration. Every betrayal, every mockery, every attempt to manipulate or control your story was part of a divine balancing act, designed to expose false power and reveal authentic strength. Those who tried to use your name for ego fuel, those who confused proximity for ownership, those who played God with your destiny, all of them became unwilling participants in your rise. They built traps for your downfall and accidentally built staircases for your elevation. You see, the universe has a poetic way of flipping the script without warning. The same people who once pitied you now study you. The same ones who underestimated you now quote you. Their plots backfired because your life was never in their jurisdiction. It was under divine management. You weren't being buried, you were being planted. And when your harvest came, It exposed the difference between fabricated status and divine favor. Their counterfeit confidence couldn't survive the realness of your evolution. They thought they were humbling you, but they were really preparing you. They thought they were silencing you, but they were unknowingly amplifying you. You didn't just win, you transcended. You didn't just survive, you became the proof that purpose can't be cancelled by human interference. Every time they misused their access, heaven revoked their authority. Every time they lied on your name, truth multiplied your reach. Every humiliation became an ingredient for your transformation. You rose, not through revenge, but through revelation. And now, your story stands as living evidence. You can't play God in someone's life and expect to stay untouched. When they mocked your struggle, heaven took notes. When they tampered with your peace, God turned their schemes into sermons. You became the living lesson they never expected to learn, that authenticity outlasts arrogance, and destiny doesn't need validation to be fulfilled. You are walking proof that divine timing always exposes false thrones and restores rightful crowns. If this message resonated with your spirit, family, don't just scroll past it. Take a moment to breathe in how far you've come and how powerfully God turned everything around in your favor. Then go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because this kind of truth deserves a seat in your soul every week. Like, comment, and share this message with someone who needs the reminder that no one can rewrite what heaven has already published. Your rise is divine proof that every setback was secretly sacred. God bless you.